pop our slides up?
Yes, of course. Please do pop your slides up. Yeah. Right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Becky, the Chief Exec of the EA, and I'm really pleased to be here for this afternoon's session, the secondary English curriculum across the 4 UK nations. And you can see the beautiful slides popping up there. Thank you, Becky. A quick word about the EA before we get going properly. So the EA is a learner society and subject association which was formed in 1906 to promote, support and celebrate the discipline of English studies. We cover all stages of education from primary and early years through to secondary and further education to higher education and beyond. And we cover all parts of the discipline across language, linguistics, literature and creative writing. Now, events like this one are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers. So thank you ever so much to Becky and Wendy for this afternoon's session, and they will introduce themselves properly shortly. Our members also make it possible to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fees. So if you would like to contribute to the national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please do consider joining us. Membership starts at just £29 and enables you to support our events and campaigning work for a whole year, and you get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all our journals. Okay, enough from me. It's now my pleasure to hand over to you, Becky. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Becky, and thank you very much for the warm welcome and the invitation to join you and colleagues here this afternoon. It's really great to be here. My name is Becky. We have lots of Beckys in the room, it seems. I'm a researcher at the University of Warwick. I work in the School of Education Studies. I am a former English teacher, so I worked for quite a number of years in schools in Birmingham and the West Midlands, teaching English for secondary age students up to 18, including A-level and post-16 GCSE resits as well. So yeah, I'm coming at this as very much a researcher, but also someone who is still extremely passionate about the world of English and the ever-changing landscape that we are seeing in relation to the curriculum, not just in England, but also thinking about that across the other UK nations, which we'll say a little bit more about as we go through the talk. I'm also joined by my fantastic colleague, Wendy, who has been working closely with me on this project and also a number of other projects. Wendy, do you just want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Becky, and thank you, second Becky. I'm Wendy. I'm a first year PhD student at the University of Warwick, and I'm actually supervised by Becky. I also have a degree and background in English and philosophy, so I'm really looking forward to discussing English with you all and hearing your contributions.
Thanks, Wendy. That's great. We'll get going. We've got a kind of hopefully a sort of mixed media session in the sense that we are going to be sharing some of our findings from some of our recent work, but we're seeing this. I'll just move the slide on a little bit, but we're seeing this session as hopefully an opportunity to both share the work we've done previously, quite recently, but even more importantly, to hear from people kind of working in the field, working in schools, thinking about some of these questions around curriculum and English on a very much day-to-day basis. And we're also thinking about what might be next in terms of research within the space of English education. We know that there is fantastic work already going on by many colleagues out there. And so we're wondering whether from our project there is anything further that's needed, whether teachers or young people or families and communities have a sense of what also might be useful going forward and thinking about the subject within the UK, but also perhaps further afield as well. Just a bit of background about what we are hoping to cover in the session today. So I think we've probably done introductions and welcomes, which is great, but a huge welcome to all of you as well. We're going to be thinking a little bit about the English curriculum in your context. So we are just going to invite a little bit of participation if you feel like putting something in the chat, just sharing your thoughts. There is nothing onerous and no pressure to do so unless you wish to, but we would really, really welcome just hearing your kind of initial thoughts on what English looks like for you, how you feel about it. We recognise that's a very subjective thing to consider, particularly perhaps at 4:30 on a busy Thursday. We may hear different views there, and that's absolutely great. But we'll feed that into thinking about our project and why we thought it was worthwhile to study, and why we think it is worthwhile to study the curriculum, and particularly in relation to English as well. we'll sort of zoom in then a little bit more to our specific project and the work that we completed last year, our analysis of curriculum policy across the 4 nations. And Wendy's going to share some of our sort of key findings. As you'll have seen when you signed up for the webinar, we've published a couple of pieces about this, and I think Becky is going to share that article, the link to the article, with colleagues after the session, along with the slides. It is an open access article, so everyone can access it without having to go through any paywalls or anything like that. And then, yeah, as I said, we'd like to kind of finish the session with thinking about what's next for subject English, and whether further research, or maybe something else, maybe it's not research, but whether, what more could we be doing or should we be doing in relation to this important area. So yes, before we start, we would love to hear from you, if that's okay. And we're just looking for a word or two, a couple of words, but whether you're able to just share anything in terms of what you think of the English curriculum, either the one that you're kind of working with and enacting in your school, or the kind of more national curriculum that perhaps you're working with as well. Obviously, those two things might overlap and interlink, probably will. But yeah, just any initial thoughts on that. Oh, Becky, I see you've copied the links into the chat already. That's brilliant. So I think the way this is set up is that I will be able to see anything that people put in the chat. So we'll just give people a minute. I'll stop talking. Please do feel free to share any words or phrases, your feelings about the English curriculum. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sheila. You've kicked us off there. I think that sense of frustration is quite widespread. We've heard that quite a bit in our conversations. Jenny, outmoded, unfit for purpose, out of kilter with HE. That's really interesting. Thank you. I should have said as well, when we're talking about English in this session, I'm very much thinking about English language or English literature. I know some people sort of are making the curriculum in England makes quite clear distinctions, but we are very open to all here. Unrepresentative of learners. Thanks, Gail. GCSE seems especially constrained. Yeah, okay. Joanne, working in FE context. That's really interesting. Students' ability to connect with curriculum can be difficult. Yes, we have found similar. Watered down version. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for popping your thoughts in here so far, and please do continue to do so. Although I realise this is slightly gloomy reading. Yeah, we're seeing quite a kind of negative picture being represented here, and I think that very much chimes with some of the findings that we're going to report later in the session, and with conversations that we've had with lots of teachers and leaders within schools relating to the English curriculum. So yes, those final comments, not fit for the 21st century and lacking in diverse voices representing our learners. Yeah. Which is really interesting. And again, Wendy will say a bit more about this, but there are some slight differences in relation to some of those issues when we look across the 4 UK nations and some of the emphasis that is put on curriculum and subject English across the different countries as well. Okay, thanks very much, everyone, for that. That's really helpful. So as a bit of background and leading on from your thoughts there, we thought it would be helpful just to kind of justify what we're doing here, why we've done this study, why is it helpful, and it may seem kind of fairly obvious in many ways. There's lots of interesting things to explore in relation to curriculum and English, but yeah, within our work we were kind of thinking quite hard about, why is it important to study this? Why does it matter? And again, just to sort of reiterate that we are thinking about this in quite a practical sense. So for us, curriculum, is a real thing. It impacts people's lives on a daily basis, whether that's teachers, young people, but also wider society, sometimes kind of families, communities as well. We know as well that curriculum cuts across nearly everything we do in education. So sometimes it's kind of talked about as if it's sort of a discrete thing, as if it's almost separate from pedagogy or assessment or behaviour or whatever it might be, but quite often we can make links with most of those other areas of education in relation to curriculum somehow. It's also really interesting to think about curriculum as policy or as practice or both. Again, we often see these kind of sort of false distinctions, really. Curriculum is sometimes thought of as a very dry document that the government produce every few years and pop up on their website. They might ask teachers for some consultation or others to kind of feed into it, but it goes up onto the website. It's a policy document. But of course, we all know that the reality of that is that curriculum has to be translated. It has to be taken from that document, and something else has to be produced in terms of the classroom, what happens day to day between teachers and students. But there are also multiple layers between that in terms of the national policy documents that we see, and maybe schemes of work that get created within schools, lesson plans, right down to the kind of micro practices that happen day to day with teachers and students there. And linked to those points, of course, curriculum is extremely contested. Again, sometimes people talk about curriculum as if it is this sort of neutral document that has just come from sort of, nowhere or no one, but it is obviously something that has been created, and there are people, humans behind it, who have made very, very conscious decisions about what should be included and what shouldn't be included, and whose voices are heard in that process. So this idea of it is something, very political, definitely not neutral. Also sort of coupled with the fact that it doesn't stay the same for very long. So we're very aware, there are curriculum reviews happening at the moment. It could mean some changes. Some may be welcome, some less so. And we see that kind of cycle happening quite regularly. There are also lots of questions which, I think are quite interesting around what counts as curriculum. So as I was saying, which voices are heard there, who gets to feed into those discussions, and what actually gets to make it into the curriculum. And again, on what level are we talking there? What goes into this kind of official documentation? And often coupled with that, the assessment requirements for a particular subject. But also, what feeds into particular schools? What do particular teachers or leaders have in terms of views about what counts as curriculum? And we also know from quite a lot of sort of discourse around curriculum, but also in relation to subject English, which I'll say a little bit more about in a moment, we are hearing a lot about crisis, and we have done in relation to curriculum for about the last decade now. There have been concerns around, is curriculum studies as a kind of academic area of interest in crisis? And both Apple and Young have written quite compelling pieces around, they feel very much that this area of study is in crisis, that it isn't following the direction that perhaps they think it should. But also we do hear that in relation to English as a subject as well, and some concerns around the declining interest in our subject, the numbers of students taking it for A-level, for undergraduate level study, and even into teacher education. There are real concerns now about the number of people wanting to go on and be English teachers. And it's interesting to think about the extent to which that picture is mirrored across different countries within the UK as well. And then just to sort of finish this little section on curriculum. So a lot of the work we have done here, Wendy and I, around curriculum has been quite inspired by Mark Priestley and his work on curriculum making. I'm not going to read this excerpt. I'll just give everyone a few minutes to look through that. But I think for me, it kind of captures some of the very key questions about why curriculum and curriculum making is so vital at this particular point in time. And there is the link there to Mark's blog on this particular issue, a nice sort of recent short piece, which is really great to read. But he's got an excellent back catalogue, I would also say, of fantastic work in relation to curriculum. And at the heart of a lot of it is his arguments that curriculum is very much a social practice. It is something that is made and is remade over time by different actors, who become involved with the process, and that also curriculum is happening on these many different layers that we're thinking about here. So from the very micro layer to what is happening, in the classroom, right up to the kind of national macro levels that we might think about in terms of the kinds of policies that we've been looking at here too. And I'm not going to dwell on this slide for very long because I'm presuming we we all kind of agree that studying English, both as an academic subject, but also in terms of research in relation to education and how subject English is delivered and experienced, is a kind of worthwhile endeavour. Certainly, Wendy and I feel very strongly about that. And actually, one of the reasons why this study has come about is because, as I've mentioned in that final bullet point, we've often found that sometimes English and English education can be overlooked within the wider field of education research. That's particularly the case, I would say, in relation to some of the sort of evidence-informed body of work that we are seeing now. So, for example, if you look at the list of projects by the EEF, and some fantastic work going on and funded by the EEF, but there is comparatively little which is based in English classrooms compared with, for example, maths, sciences, or in primary settings. Equally, both Wendy and I have been involved in some work around FE and post-16 GCSE resits. We did a practice review where we were looking at the extent of that research across the country and sort of reviewing that. And again, we found the majority of work around GCSE resits, which should look at both English and maths. The majority of that work was coming out of the maths context, and there was very little. This was a few years ago, but very little in relation to English. So yeah, very much a chance to kind of champion the subject here, hopefully. But as I say, there are so many reasons why we think English is important. We know it's integral to the lives and futures of the young people that we work with every day. But it's also just such a crucial, important, brilliant part of ours and of other people's history, culture, and society. And we think that makes it very worthwhile. I've included the picture here of the English play. I don't know if anyone managed to get the chance to see this in Stratford or in London. I saw it last year, and I just found it completely inspiring. It was such a wonderful play, and it was very much about English as an additional language. It was set in a context where English was being taught as a second language, but it really beautifully, I thought, captured the kind of power of English and its importance for community and participation within society. So yeah, I'm just recommending it because I really enjoyed it. And then just thinking about the UK, so why study English across the UK? The vast majority of studies on subject English have come out of England, which we might think isn't that surprising. But again, we felt there was a bit of a neglect of what was going on in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, because all of those countries, of course, are teaching English and teaching it as one of the national languages. The UK is an interesting and quite unusual context for lots of reasons. We obviously have the devolved nations. They operate quite separately in terms of their education systems and who has overall governance of that. And yet the nations are very much connected or united within this kingdom that we are based. So thinking about what that means in relation to a subject which, as I said in the second bullet point, is also a national language, but it's definitely not the only one. And as soon as you move past England, you are in other countries where, English isn't the only language that is thought about or used in everyday life. Of course, in England as well, there are myriad other languages used by our students and our teachers in schools as well. But English is often very much kind of thought about as the one and only national language. English is also interesting, of course, because it describes for some people a nationality or an identity that they wish to adopt. But again, this isn't the case for everyone. So we begin to see this kind of interesting sense of English as a subject, but it's also kind of taking up space as a language or a nationality or an identity. But again, it's not a kind of wholesale thing. It means different things to different people. And that's perhaps, again, why it's kind of fascinating to think about that in terms of the conflicts and the contested nature of it as a subject. And as we're saying, it is a subject, and in some places it is a kind of discrete subject. It is called English. That is what is on students' exercise books or on the doors of departments in schools. But as Wendy is going to tell us a little bit more about, in some countries that's not always the case. It's not necessarily called English, or it's kind of connected in very closely with other subject areas, whether that's relating to languages, literatures, media, drama, communication more broadly. And of course, as we know, within primary settings, but also in relation to initiatives such as whole school literacy, English kind of filters in other ways there too. We've also got this context, I would say, at the moment, perhaps which has been ongoing for a while, but again, which, if we think about the points made above around language, nationality, identity, society, we are living in quite a polarized age politically. We are seeing a real rise in populism internationally, but also within the nations of the UK. We have a sort of new context in relation to migration and what that means for the demographics of the country, and how English as a language, a subject, an identity is being thought about or perceived. We've also got contexts where equality, diversity, and inclusion initiatives have often come to the fore. Certainly within higher education, for example, there's been huge moves towards decolonisation of the curriculum. We've also seen that as quite significant within Wales, for example, in relation to the new secondary curriculum there too. And of course, we've got kind of, ongoing and quite radical shifts in terms of technology and wider social educational reforms and policies as well. So that's the kind of context that we're working on, which is it's quite broad, but again, I think it kind of makes that point that English is everywhere and sometimes nowhere, but it's sort of cross-cutting and connecting across all of these different spheres, both within schools, within education, but further afield as well. And then just briefly from me before I hand over to Wendy. So what did we do with all of this in terms of all this kind of background? So we decided to do quite a small initial study at the outset. We wanted to know what was in the English curriculum. So what were the aims of the English curricula across the four UK nations? What were the governments of those nations suggesting was important and relevant and should be shared? We didn't know necessarily to what extent there would be differences or similarities, or what would be the kind of focus or different emphases, I guess, across the different areas of English, both language and literature across those nations. So yeah, it was very much a kind of way of comparing and thinking about the curriculum content, so what's in there, but also whether those curriculum documents gave us any cause to think about pedagogy and ways of teaching, and also assessment in secondary English as well. And then thirdly, sort of linking back to the previous point I made, what was also kind of interest there was around the beyond school or the contextual factors which might be influencing secondary English curricula. So do any of these policy documents tell us about, why they're thinking, about different issues which are kind of beyond school? So for example, bilingualism comes up in a few of the curriculum as a really, really key issue. So yeah, we were looking at those and thinking about what those influences might be, or the extent to which they were also absent as well. So Wendy, I think that's enough for me. I'm going to hand over to you for some of our kind of key findings, which there's a few here. They're often quite intersecting, but just thinking about these sort of multiple aims of what we are doing in English and what the curriculum thinks we should be doing. Okay.
Thank you, Becky. So across the four nations, we can see that English is framed very differently in policy and in each curriculum. For example, England prioritizes standard English and the British literary canon, in addition to technical accuracy. So here we see texts like Shakespeare, pre-1914, and contemporary prose and drama and poetry. In essence, all these preserve the cultural heritage of Britain. The devolved nations instead prioritize linguistic diversity and breadth regarding where and who the literature comes from. While all of them focus on literary heritage, this is more expansive in the outwardly plurilingual devolved nations policies, such as Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales. So we'll come to the next 2 points in the slides, in the upcoming slides, but briefly, England also positions English as a standalone subject. So again, being a discrete subject, like Becky was saying, it's often studied either as English literature, English language, or both, compared to other nations, especially Northern Ireland, where it sits hand in hand with media and communication studies. On pedagogy and autonomy, England uses the most authoritative and imperative language, while the devolved nations tended towards guidance and supporting questions. All, however, shared that English was central to successful civic participation. Yeah, thank you. So as mentioned, in England, English is typically considered on its own. So English literature, English language, and no further than that. We see this as an exclusive keeper or guarding of the British literary heritage and Anglo-centric canon by being so exclusive. And on the other hand, the devolved nations position it hand in hand or as complemented by other subjects like English and drama, English and communication, or English and media. This is most prevalent in Wales and Northern Ireland. It's seen here in these countries as part of a general evolution of communication, requiring multimodal demonstrations for what real life and real participation in society actually is. Next slide, please.
You see that?
Yeah, thank you, Becky. So on prescription and teacher autonomy, England's documents are highly directive. They use language like should and should not, and this is not really used in the other nations, apart from a few times in Scotland, again with the guidance in mind. In England, the onus is placed on teachers to enact this guidance and to fulfill pupils' achievements and expectations as per the curriculum guidelines. In Scotland and Wales, they use more guided approaches, so questions and a list of suggestions for considerations. Here, teachers are invited to use their own discretion to enact the guidance and prioritise students' development. Again, Northern Ireland encourages multimedia forms of communication and is very forgiving and open to how teachers prescribe the curriculum, so long as it is diverse, broad, and using multimedia. Thank you. And finally, beyond the classroom, English is vital to developing students as active members of society and flourish in civic participation and discourse. This is a general theme that we can see across all the nations of the UK. However, England tends to be framed as an individual level through students' independent levels of confidence, fluency, and accuracy within England. So we have in the literature themes of teaching to test, and we can kind of see that as individuals, as English is a means to an end at being successful in English. Whereas in the devolved nations, they emphasize linguistic diversity, openness, and the subject as a means of framing one's identity among a larger, diverse community that comprise the nations. In some documents, especially in Wales and Northern Ireland, they do refer to other ethnic minority communities and languages such as Polish and Urdu as well. So that's kind of a recognition that English is part of something much larger than it is.
Thanks, Wendy. That's brilliant. And yeah, what we've kind of shared there is a sort of snapshot of some of our key findings. But what I'm thinking back to is some of the comments that people put in the chat sort of 20 minutes ago. And I feel like some of those themes are really coming through here. So some of the questions about the extent to which the curriculum, perhaps particularly the curriculum in England, but arguably elsewhere, feels outdated or irrelevant to the young people that we work with, that did come through in our analysis. We were really quite struck by, as Wendy said, the differences in tone between the policy documents, the kind of very directive, authoritative tone found in the English curriculum compared with that of the other three nations, where it was this more sense of guidance or advice. The key thing to really hold on to here, I guess, though, is that we were just focused on, the policy documents that we had in hand and the ones that, were available on the internet. What we don't know and what we aren't able to comment on because of the nature of the data that we were working with is the extent to which this kind of written curriculum, the documents that we saw, is actually what happens in practice in the classroom. So we are necessarily restricted in being able to comment on how curriculum is implemented or enacted. But in terms of telling us what, from a sort of top-down approach from the government, this does give us quite interesting insights into the varying, and they are often varying rather than kind of similar, the varying aims and content of the curriculum that we saw there. Something that I think we might pick up on, hopefully again in the later sort of final stages of the session, is also around teacher agency and professionalism. And that very much comes through in the Mark Priestley quote that I shared earlier, but this idea of curriculum making as something that teachers are or should be involved in, teachers as collaborators on the curriculum. And it'd be interesting to hear from colleagues here around the extent to which you feel that is part of your role, and whether you do feel you get a sense of agency, authority around the curriculum that you work with, or not, as is sometimes the case. So sort of leading on to that, we found, as Wendy has kind of clearly outlined here, some really quite diverse features of the various curriculum across the 4 nations. And some of these also kind of gave us pause to think about conflicting or contradictory foci or aims that were present. In some of the curriculum, there was a sense, they were asking for one thing, but then they were also asking for another, and how do these things kind of marry together? And I guess we were just interested to learn from you about tensions within the English curriculum. Is this something that you experience? A classic one is often around the breadth and depth question. Are we trying to cover too much? Should we be trying to cover things in more depth, or the other way round? There also, there might be questions around, for example, literature. Wendy mentioned the kind of political turn, I guess, in relation to the cultural heritage model, and this kind of, in England, this renewed sense of we need to hang on to the canon and to make sure children have access to this, possibly at the exclusion of other perhaps more diverse or contemporary texts that we might be interested in teaching as well. So yeah, I'm not going to sort of give too many more examples, but just whether there's any tensions that you as practitioners, leaders within your field kind of face or see in relation to English and how it is enacted within your settings. We'd love to hear a little bit about those. So I'll just give everyone a few minutes and I will stop talking. Thank you. Oh, Sarah, thanks for your comment. Oh, it's so nice you're here. That's great. Thank you for your comment. Yes, it was quite daunting to undertake, but definitely exciting and worthwhile. That's a really great question. Yeah, so I'll just answer that just in case anyone else is busy writing about tensions. But yeah, just to say so our focus was on curriculum documentation or curriculum related policy documents. So we did include, for example, things that maybe came from Ofsted in England relating to the English curriculum, or things like if there was a kind of press release from the government about a particular policy development in relation to subject English. So yeah, our article, I think, Wendy, has the full list of documents in the appendices. I'm pretty sure it does.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
we can, certainly share those. Joanne, thank you. Canon needs to be accessible though, so preserving it at the cost of accessibility should be considered. Yeah, that's this idea of accessibility and inclusion and the tensions there. Thank you. Exam board influence, that's a really important issue, and the way that curriculum and assessment across the whole UK really, but perhaps in stronger ways in some nations than others, but the fact that curriculum and assessment are so interlinked, particularly of course at key stage 4, yeah, I mean, really comes through as a key challenge for some teachers and some students, arguably, as well. Jenny. Yes, yeah. So this issue around exam boards is, yeah, really important. Thank you. Oh, we've got a brilliant set of comments here, actually, and focusing on some quite different issues as well. Yeah, more diversity needed. Yes, our friend Shakespeare, he is, he pops up, but in England, obviously, he is, kind of named quite frequently. That's not necessarily the case in some of the other nations as well. Um, Sarah, yeah, reception would be another project in itself, but we're quite interested in that, and it is something we might actually try to follow up on. Mandy, thank you. You're following up from what Jenny says, and Julie, different qualifications and requirements for state fee paying schools. That's really interesting, actually, Julie. I hadn't thought about that in relation to, the mainstream and independent schools and the differences in curriculum, but also the assessment practices there too. Thank you. Um, Great. Okay. We'll just leave that open in case anyone wants to pop anything else in there. But yeah, this is why it's so great to kind of come and talk to people and share some of these ideas, but also to get some feedback on how you're sort of interpreting and hearing what we're saying. Sorry, Sheila, I'm just going to mention your comment as well. Yeah, more creative schools, drama, theatre schools, and more open to trying new English texts. That's interesting. So the role of context perhaps is important there. Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, we've just got a couple of slides and then we'll pause for any further questions, and then I think that will be our time done. So yeah, what's next? What does this all mean? I mean, Wendy and I have done this piece of work as a kind of discrete study. We weren't given any funding for it or made to do it. We just kind of really wanted to because we thought it was important and it was very much a gap that was there. And it has led us to think about lots of kind of other avenues where we think further research would hopefully be really beneficial. We don't just want to be doing research for the sake of it. We want to connect with teachers, with young people, with communities, and think about what might be relevant and helpful. As we said, our study really does only scratch the surface here of some of these important issues. But the last kind of question for you, I guess, and please do feel free to put questions to us as well, but is what do you think, as people working in schools, and often schools very much encouraged to be research informed at the moment and drawing upon research and evidence, is there anything that for you as English practitioners, working more generally within the field of English, like what would be helpful, what would be interesting? It might connect with curriculum, it might not, it might be something completely different. But as we said right back at the beginning, there is a lot less subject specific work happening out there in English compared with some subjects. The work that is happening is fantastic, and we cite quite a lot of it in our paper. But there is possibly an argument that the field and the subject could be strengthened by further research, but also research that is very much co-produced and in collaboration with teachers, schools, colleges as well. So again, I'll just give you a couple of moments. If there is anything that comes to mind, please don't worry if not, or if you're thinking we do not need any more research or any more of this, but what might be helpful. And then, yeah, as I said, if there's any questions that you have for us, we'd be really, really happy to answer them. Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, this Shakespeare exceptionalism, it needs to be challenged. That's a really good point, actually, because sometimes it is challenged, but it's, as you say, it could, perhaps the argument could be strengthened with some further research, whether that's about bringing in sort of the wider views of the subject community, or developing arguments for why we need to challenge it. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Sheila. So more research is needed and awareness raising. Yes, we would agree. That's great what you're saying about what are children saying. Wendy and I have been talking quite a bit about trying to capture children's views and experiences of learning English. And again, there's been some great work done around this. I'm thinking particularly of, for example, Rachel Roberts' work looking at why young people do or don't choose A-level English, for example. But I think arguably, we could do more, and perhaps some of the earlier years sort of brought into that. Also thinking about it across the UK, because we suspect that kids are having quite different experiences of English or whatever it is called in these different countries. Great, thank you. And Sheila, yeah, the rigid forms of teaching. So this is interesting, the overlap, I think, between pedagogy and curriculum, and again, how young people and how teachers very much are experiencing that, because it can feel so constraining for teacher agency, autonomy, your sense of professionalism. Some teachers might welcome it and enjoy the structure and frameworks that are put in place. Others, I think, are finding that quite challenging. Research on the focus of STEM and its impact. Yep, that's interesting, Julie, because that's often being put forward now as a reason why some young people aren't choosing English, and it's because the STEM emphasis has been so successful, and it's like you'll make more money if you do STEM, but actually trying to capture that would be very helpful. And Mandy, I'd like to know why students are not choosing to take A-level English literature. We have so few applying. Oh, it's just heartbreaking to hear that they've cut that subject for next year. I'm so sorry. Yeah, as I said, Rachel Roberts has done some work on that, but again, I think it could be something that could be expanded out. Yeah, STEM marginalising English. This is very much kind of mirroring some of the concerns that we've been reading about and hearing about as well. Thanks, Sarah, as well. Yeah, the lit in colour work is brilliant. We love that. Thank you. Brilliant, thank you. If anyone has any further comments, please just keep popping them in the chat. They're really, really helpful. In terms of sort of where we are now, I'll just kind of move us on. So yeah, just last slide really. Again, if anyone wants to put any questions, thank you, Becky, for posting Rachel's work in there. That's brilliant. Yeah, are there any questions? Let me check my clock. Oh, we have 2 minutes. Apologies. I think hearing those points though was so helpful. Do feel free to put any questions. We've got a couple of minutes. If not, you are more than welcome to get in touch with Wendy and I. We are very much available to chat, and we love talking to teachers. We do a lot of it and we think it's great. And if we get to talk about English, that's even better. I've put my email address at the end of the slides here. But yeah, we're always happy to be in contact about research, teaching English or anything. I'll just wait to see if any questions come up, but if not, we can wrap up and everyone can enjoy their evenings. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming and for staying with us. It's been great to have such an engaged audience.
Thank you so much, Becky and Wendy. While we just see if any more questions do come in the chat, I'll just let everybody know that on the 26th of February, we're hosting a webinar, What Will the Curriculum and Assessment Review Mean for You? So another chance to kind of dig into what we know, what we don't know, what we need to know, all of those things about the forthcoming new national curriculum for England. Oh, I can see someone's asked a question. Can you pop the link to the article up again? Yes, I can. I will do that now.
Great. And it should also be in the link that will get sent round in the PowerPoint as well. So thanks, Becky. That's brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah. Okay. We will leave it there. Thank you, Gal. I hope everyone has a lovely rest of their evening as well. And we'll hopefully be in touch with some of you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Cheerio, everyone. Thanks.
Have a great evening.